In the Senzo Meyiwa trial at CHRISELDA, Advocate Mshololo working really hard just to show that Thabo Mosia is not competent in his work.
Well, that's right, Desiree. We had expected that when court starts this morning, there'd be a huge focus on what police allegedly did not do at the crime scene. We were expecting Advocate Zandile Mshololo to continue to poke holes in the testimony of Thabo Mosia, who we now know was the first forensic detective to be on the scene. One of the aspects that she sharply focused on just before we went to the tea break was on the issue of the bullet projectile. You would remember that yesterday, in sharp focus was the statements that had been taken from witnesses, including neighbors, who said that Maggie Piri, for example, who was one of the neighbors, had been picking up alcohol cans from the floor, and that they'd also seen some water on the floor. The defense really trying to insinuate that that crime scene had been compromised. It had been cleaned even before Thabo Mosia had arrived, and that the scene had been cordoned off even before he had arrived on the scene to take that evidence from the area where Senzo Meyiwa had been killed. So you would know now that in sharp cross-examination, she indicating, of course, that the bullet projectile, which had been found, you'd recall, on the kitchen table, had only been found on the second visit that Thabo Mosia had made to the crime scene. And you must recall what she's pushing here is she's indicating this is exactly the bullet that has basically linked the 5 suspects who are here behind me to this particular murder. So you would recall the defense representing accused number 5, Advocate Zandile Mshololo, who is currently cross-examining Mosia, basically insinuating that the evidence may have been planted at the crime scene where Senzo Meyiwa was killed, saying that it's this bullet that is in question at this particular time. He only found it at the second instance when he visited the crime scene. So really trying to poke holes in what he has brought to this particular court. Also, if you take a look at what she had said earlier on, questions about what swabs he had taken. Remember, we're consistently been referring to the swabs that were never taken from the hands of those inside in the house at the time that Senzo Meyiwa was killed. Mosia conceding that he did not take those swabs. He didn't do so, he says, because he was not given a go-ahead by his senior, and that he was also still waiting for, a task team from Gauteng to come and assist with the crime scene itself. When he was asked here in court this morning whether he had tested for the levels of alcohol from the person who is believed to have taken Senzo Meyiwa from the crime scene to the hospital, he says he did not do that. So what the defense is basically trying to do is to show that Mosia did very little in terms of his own investigation on the scene to establish what possibly could have happened on that night that Senzo Meyiwa was killed. Another aspect that we're looking at is his experience. So that started yesterday, Desiree, where he was questioned about what qualifications he has. There have been lots of arguments about whether he was indeed an expert, whether he had the necessary skills to attend to the scene. And the reason why the defense is doing this is that they're trying to prove that he was way outside his depth. He simply could not have, the reason why he did not do any of those important swabs to establish if any of the individuals inside the house had pulled the trigger, the reason why he was told by his senior to take photographs at different places, and why he did not even speak to any of the individuals inside the house about where Senzo Meyiwa was killed. You'd recall, he said that he heard that information from Brigadier Pilani Ndlovu, who has now passed on, basically trying to point to the fact that Mosia did very little. He was unqualified to be there. What we do know now is that the qualifications that he had attained just a year prior to the incident itself. So which means he had had 1 year experience when he attended to the crime scene where Senzo Meyiwa was killed. But of course, he contends that prior to him getting those qualifications, he had previously attended to quite a number of other scenes, Desiree.
CHRISELDA, let's just speak a bit to your background. Are those some of the accused? They look quite relaxed.
Yeah. Well, Desiree, I think perhaps, again, a legal expert would be best to perhaps speak about, the demeanor of the accused in this particular instance. Yes, they are here. They have been in conversation with each other throughout the breaks that we have had. Very difficult to gauge, but obviously the work of their legal representation is certainly to poke holes in what the police have brought here. Remember, the defense will always want to indicate that from the word go, from when Senzo Meyiwa was killed, police simply did not do their jobs. The crime scene itself had been compromised even way before police had got there. So very difficult at this point to speak to their demeanor, but this has been their demeanor since the beginning. Remember, from the very first instance, Desiree, when we were in the Boksburg Magistrates Court, they've maintained their innocence. They've said that they don't know why they are here. They have nothing to do with the death of Senzo Meyiwa. And remember, this was also part of this special plea that Advocate Malisela Tifo wanted to bring, where he said that his clients had simply not been read their rights had been violated. So in this particular instance, this has been their demeanor. We're not in a position, of course, to speak to them at this stage. I think I'll get into a little bit of trouble with their legal representation if I did. But at this particular point, what we're expecting for the remainder of the day, it's not likely that Advocate Zandile Mshololo will continue or will wrap up, I beg your pardon, her cross-examination. But we're expecting very much more to focus on the photographs that had been taken inside the house where Senzo Meyiwa was killed.
Just an indication earlier before the break, Judge Chifiwa indicating that he's not feeling too well. What do we know about that? Is he able to come back?
Well, Desiree, in fact, we were scheduled to return after tea at about 25 to, but that's now been extended to 1:45, and we'll certainly hear if the judge is in a position to continue. It didn't seem like there would be any challenges, but certainly we'll need to hear from that. It was the first that we're hearing from the judge, the presiding judge, Chifiwa, that he is not feeling well. We'll certainly have to wait and see if we'll continue with proceedings. But I think at this particular point, there certainly isn't any indication that we will not.
CHRISELDA, thank you so much for updating us. CHRISELDA is a senior reporter at the Pretoria High Court covering that Senzo Meyiwa murder trial.